This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan, and in for Amy this morning. Kristen McQuarrie, Chicago Tribune editorial board, and the Wall Street Journal editorial board had this to say about the shooting in the church in Sutherland Springs, Texas. Left 26 dead, 20 injured. One family, the Holcomb family, losing 8 family members, including the mother, 3 of her children, her unborn child. She was survived by a husband and her other children. 8 family members lost in that church. We saw this in Virginia when Capitol Hill police saved the lives of many members of Congress. Security officers in Garland, Texas, prevented mass casualties by killing 2 jihadists in 2015, trying to shoot up a contest featuring cartoons of Muhammad. No one wants crowds of vigilantes looking for someone to shoot, but we're sure glad Stephen Williford had a rifle and knew how to use it. Like the passengers aboard Flight 93 on 9/11 or the Yanks who foiled a terror attack on a train in Belgium in 2015, he didn't wait for orders to protect his fellow human beings. The 2 heroes in Sutherland Springs, Texas, Stephen Williford and Johnny Langendorf. First, Stephen Williford on how he responded, why he did.
I didn't have any time because I kept hearing the shots, one after another, very rapid shots, just pop, pop, pop. And I knew every one of those shots represented someone, that it was aimed at someone, that they weren't just random shots, more than likely. I grabbed a handful of ammunition and started loading my magazine. And I'm trying to survey the situation, not knowing what's going on. And then I saw a man in a black tactical helmet with a dark shaded helmet on, and obviously looked to me like it was bulletproof vest. And he had a pistol in his hand, and we exchanged gunfire. He saw me, and I saw him, and I was standing behind a pickup truck for cover, and we exchanged. I'm like, it was surreal to me. It couldn't be happening. I could not believe it. We chased him down 539, and when we first started chasing him, he was out of sight, and the man driving the truck was I found out later, his name is Johnny. He was driving at a high rate of speed, and we were trying to pass cars and catch up, and we were called 911, and we were talking to 911. I was scared for me, and I was scared for every one of them, and I was scared for my own family that just lived less than a block away. I'm no hero. I am not. I think my God, my Lord, protected me and gave me the skills to do what needed to be done. And I just wish I could have gotten there faster.
Stephen Williford, owner of an AR-15. That's how he defended himself and all those who were under attack. It's an assault rifle, according to Democrats. And some Republicans, frankly.
I think it's interesting, too, that I don't think these 2 gentlemen, they hadn't been inside the church. They hopped in a car, they chased down the shooter. And so, now they are realizing the just severity of what was happening inside that church. It's just...
They reacted in the moment to render aid.
They reacted in the moment. Mm-hmm.
Johnny Langendorf, the other individual, by Williford, to mention, former NRA instructor.
Mm-hmm.
Plumber, right? Johnny Langendorf, another ordinary guy with an ordinary neck tattoo. And he talked about that chase that
you like him so much, I think you're going to head right to the tattoo parlor when the show's over.
I really do like these guys. I mean, who could not appreciate, respect, have profound gratitude for what they did?
The media will start tearing them down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1,
right?
right?
Yeah.
Isn't that coming?
Probably, but in the meantime, it's it's fun to just get kind of the genuine feel of what was happening and what they did. And I beg to differ with Stephen Williford about his heroism. Johnny Langendorf explaining the chase. So Williford shot the shooter in the leg and the torso, the side of his bulletproof vest, and that's ultimately what disabled him down the road before the shooter took his own life. Langendorf describing the chase.
You said the chase was 12 to 15 minutes long, going 95 down these country roads. What was going through your head as this was going on?
Not a lot. I like to drive, and so if I can get away with driving fast, well, I had to catch the guy. I had to make sure he was caught. And at one point, the gentleman riding with me said, "You may have to use your truck to get him off the road." And there was no hesitation. It was do everything necessary to make sure that this guy stopped.
So Johnny Langendorf and Stephen Williford succeeded where, frankly, the United States Air Force failed. For more on this topic and Trump's Asia trip, we're pleased to be joined by our friend Steve Cortes, Fox News contributor, former Donald Trump Hispanic Advisory Council president. Steve, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan and Kristen. Thanks for having me.
So the president has said that the actions of these two and the essentially save possibly hundreds of lives, and more stringent gun laws as are being advocated for by Dem senators like Warren and Murphy and Schumer, could have cost hundreds of more lives.
Right. No, listen, this is such a human tragedy that you hate to go right into policy, but to some degree we have to, or at least the media certainly is going to drag us there whether we want to or not. And in terms of policy, we know two things. We know that a criminal, a monster, broke the law to get guns. He had no right to weapons for several reasons, because of his conviction for fracturing his stepson's skull, an infant skull. I don't know how he got only a year in prison for that, multiple years, and he'd still be in prison. So, I know it's hindsight, but boy, was that a mistake. That light of a sentence for that serious a crime. That disqualified him. On top of that, taking psychiatric drugs disqualified him. So he had no business. He was already gun controlled. We know that. And then the second factor, which the president mentioned, is had these law-abiding men been gun controlled, who knows what kind of further carnage could have been inflicted by this maniac. And so thank goodness that good guys with guns and a good guy with a truck, regular Americans, everyday heroes. And of course, I guess real heroes don't tell you they're heroes, so I'm not surprised that he doesn't say that Stephen didn't. But of course he's a hero. They both are, and certainly saved lives. And I'm so glad that we had an NRA instructor, a member of America's largest and oldest civil rights organization, the NRA, who was there, ready, trained, and willing to risk his life to save the lives of people he may not even know.
Can you talk a little bit about where we go from here in terms of this mistake by the Air Force? It's so infuriating. I mean, this was someone who, there's more information coming out even as we've been on the air this morning, that he pleaded guilty to striking, choking, kicking, and pulling the hair of his then wife on 2 separate occasions. He at one point pointed a loaded gun at her, and he struck his stepson so hard with his fists on the head and body that, you're right, he fractured his skull. So where do we go from here? And it doesn't sound like we need a new piece of legislation. Protocol wasn't followed, but is that where it ends? We don't need new legislation, and we just need them to enforce whatever protocols are there?
I think so. If there is new legislation needed, I don't think it's really so much on the gun part as it is on the psychiatric part. It does seem like we have a problem with more and more clearly mentally ill people who are able to operate in our society at their own will, and then able to acquire firearms either legally or illegally, and in this case, illegally. Mm-hmm. So I'm not opposed, as much as I'm a Second Amendment proponent, I'm not opposed to looking at legislative answers there. I don't know what those are exactly, to be perfectly honest, but I think we need to look at that, particularly given the prevalence of psychiatric drugs in our country right now, which are ubiquitous, and that is certainly a common thread among these mass killers. If they're not ideologically focused, if it's not a jihadi or something like that, in almost every case, psychiatric drugs are a commonality here. So I think that's something that we need to look at. As far as the Air Force, and listen, I hate to criticize the military ever because I just so appreciate everything they do, but I do think we need to look at how in the heck did he get a 1-year sentence for the terrible crimes you just described? I mean, to me, that's a multiple-year incarceration.
There's a few questions. I think that's a good one to raise is the sentencing there. Then obviously the failure to report is indefensible, and somebody needs to be held account for that error. But then also rewinding all the way back to his enlistment, and if the reports are correct that he was on antipsychotic drugs as a grade schooler, then the question of the decision to allow him to enlist in the Air Force, which is no easy feat if you've got any problems in your background, that's another question the Air Force has to answer, it seems to me.
Yeah, that's a good point, Dan. And I don't know. I've never served in the military, but I believe that's disqualifying. Now, maybe he lied about it. He certainly wasn't against lying for his gun permits, so he probably lied to get into the Air Force. But you're right, too. Yeah, we need to take a look, at all of that. And but I think I want to point this out, too, because I've seen this a lot from liberal media in particular. Even though I work for Fox, I watch a lot of MSNBC and CNN. I always want to see what the other side is up to.
Yeah, they're up to covering Trump feeding the koi fish in Japan. Yeah.
And one thing I keep hearing over and over and over is that this doesn't happen anywhere else. And it just drives me nuts because it's not true. And I want to scream at the TV. Have you heard of Bataclan in Paris? Have you heard of the Norway massacre? 77 people killed by a gunman. I believe it was 130 in Paris, something like that, roughly. So that's not true. This does happen in other places, unfortunately. All right, and it shouldn't make us feel good. But let's stop pretending that this is a particular American problem. It has certainly been profound lately and just incredibly saddening, right, because of two major events, relatively back to back. But let's not jump to policy prescriptions on the basis that this is a uniquely American problem, because it is not. And to me, unfortunately, other than the psychiatric drug part of it, which again I think needs to be looked into by people, medical experts who know a lot more than I do. Other than that, to me, I think the only real answer that makes sense is we just need more good armed security. Churches, schools, everywhere. Good guys with guns are the answer, at least part of the answer.
He is Steve Cortes, Fox News contributor, former head of Trump's Hispanic Advisory Council. Thanks for joining us, Steve. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And one other thing, just adding on, the other thing we need, in addition to good citizens that fill in the gaps, as did Stephen Williford and Johnny Langendorf, this statement that was made by a friend of the church shooter on Facebook just is chilling to me. Courtney Kleber writes, "We had a lot of good times together. Over the years, we all saw him change into something that he wasn't. To be completely honest, I'm not really surprised this happened, and I don't think anyone who knew him is very surprised either." I mean, I think I'm not going to ascribe responsibility to Courtney Kleber or whoever else knew him and saw what Courtney Kleber saw, but the idea that you're not surprised, I mean, I think it's difficult to conceive that somebody could do what he did in that church. But if you're not surprised, if that's your reaction in the hours after that atrocity, then man, I mean, people. I don't want people to be, lives of others, kind of, the civilian Stasi. But if you see somebody in that kind of distress and going to that dark a place, and maybe they did, and we don't know yet. But the other lesson seems to me from this, if you see a person struggling to keep their grip on civilized society and they have otherwise exhibited egregious acts of violence, then it's time to rally the troops around that person. You know what I mean?
I think more will come out. I just find it hard to believe that with that history of domestic violence, that he was posting things on Facebook of acquiring weapons, that there weren't red flags popping up.
Yeah.
And he moved around a lot, so that may complicate things. And I know we always have this problem with sharing information between law enforcement and FBI, but I bet as this unfolds, you are going to hear from friends, in-laws, exes who alerted authorities repeatedly to him being unhinged, and law enforcement, either hands are tied, he's not committing an act of violence at the moment, But I would be shocked if we don't learn more about that in the coming days.
Steve Cortes joined us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.